My name is Sheldon Shaeffer. I used to work for a long time with the UN system in New York and Paris and Bangkok, but now I'm the chairman of the board of directors of an organization called the Asia-Pacific Regional Network on Early Childhood, which has a secretariat in Singapore, but a membership across the region of about 2,000 individuals and many institutions concerned with early childhood education. Well, I think one thing very important is that it is a sector that's expanding very rapidly. You have more and more governments who are considering early childhood education, preschool education as part of basic education. So the governments and ministries of education are putting more funds, not yet enough, but more funds into early childhood education. Which means many more children are entering kindergarten than they used to in the past. I think also there's a greater concern for quality. They understand that early childhood education is really only useful if it's a good quality experience, which means better teachers, better facilities. And I think the other issue is probably this attempt to try to link early childhood education with what's happening in primary education, in the formal primary school. Well, I think one of the issues is that still too much early childhood education is overly academic. Preschool, daycare, kindergarten, even the early grades of primary school should be much more informal and play-based. There's a pressure from parents, there's a pressure from ministries of education to try to get children literate quickly, especially in English, when in fact what you should be getting in preschool education is what we call pre-literacy or emergent literacy. So that's one of the challenges. How do you try to combat the trend towards making preschool education overly academic? The other challenge, I think, is that there's probably still too much focus on the use of national language or even English. Preschool education, where possible, should be taught in a child's mother tongue, what the child is actually speaking at home. That makes it much easier for the child to become literate first in the mother tongue and then in the national and in the international languages. I think another challenge is this still underfinancing. There's more and more research that shows the importance of preschool education in terms of eventually saving money in many parts of the system, not only education, but health, labor, and other kinds of things. But you still have many governments that are only putting a very small percentage of their education budget into preschool education. There's much more money spent per student at a university than there is per student in a kindergarten. One word is, or it's a phrase maybe, cultural sensitivity. How do you try to make sure that preschool education is sensitive to the culture and to the language of the child? The other one is this issue of transition. Children come out of what is a play-based, child-centered kindergarten or preschool, and they suddenly go into a primary school which is much more rigid, much more formal, much more focused on rote learning rather than on play. You end up having the preschool curriculum is written by one part of a ministry, the grade 1 curriculum written by a different part. The kindergarten teacher is trained by one part of a ministry, the grade 1 teacher by another part of the ministry. So there's no easy transition from one to the other. And I think seeing, another phrase I would say is 0 to 8. More and more countries are defining early childhood, including early childhood education, as covering the ages of 0 to 8. And that forces governments to consider this issue of transition and how do you make sure that early learning in the early grades of primary school is also successful. Part of it is it'll simply keep expanding. You have more and more systems that are getting larger, more and more governments putting in some funding. I think that's one of the changes. There is, in some cases, introduction of more technologies, though again that's limited often to private elite preschools and kindergartens and not to the more common average rural poor kindergarten. So there's going to be an increasing disparity, I think, in many ways between rich urban elite kindergartens and those that are in other parts of a country. One of the changes, probably negative in many ways, will be the increasing disparity of service. There are some countries in the region where if you're coming from a family in the upper 20% of income, you have maybe a 10 times more likely chance to be in preschool than if you come from the poorest 20%. So those who are rich are already getting richer in terms of education, and those who are poor have much less opportunity. So that means children who are coming from poor, rural, remote populations going into primary school are going to be even more disadvantaged, and that's one of the negative changes I think might happen. Oh, I think fine. So it's still early. I found the opening session very interesting, and in fact, I have now to go to be in a panel on early childhood. So I'm very happy that there is a stream devoted to early childhood, though there are not many people listening to the presentations. It's a good place to start, and I'm glad to see that's happening.